Morbius. Michael Morbius.
Discover who you're meant to be. The back.
I have powers that can only be described as superhuman. But the cure.
That monster's within us. It's up to us to control it.
To hunt. And consume.
Why shouldn't they know what it feels like for a change?
Morbius.
You've been given a gift.
What happens when a brilliant scientist tries to cure a deadly disease but accidentally turns himself into a blood-hunting monster? Tandar Morbius 2022 takes us into a dark world of science, vampires, superpowers, and a dangerous experiment gone horribly wrong. Haladado, welcome to Filmy Reviews Hub. Let's break down the story, biggest twists, and shocking facts you might have missed. Her Morbius is a 2022 American superhero movie based on the Marvel Comics character of the same name. The movie was produced by Columbia Pictures along with Marvel Entertainment, RR Productions, and Matt Tolmark Productions, and it was distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. It is the third movie in Sony's Spider-Man universe, also known as the SSU. The movie stars Jared Leto as Dr. Michael Morbius, with Matt Smith, Adria Arjona, Jared Harris, Al Madrigal, and Tyrese Gibson also appearing in major roles. The film was directed by Daniel Espinosa, while the screenplay was written by Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. The story follows Dr. Michael Morbius, a brilliant scientist who has spent most of his life trying to find a cure for a rare blood disease. He is extremely smart and talented, but his illness has caused him serious health problems. After years of research, Morbius comes up with a risky experiment that could finally save his life. Morbius combines his own DNA with genetic material taken from vampire bats, hoping the experiment will cure his disease. At first, the treatment seems like a huge success. His body becomes stronger, his illness appears to disappear, and he gains incredible abilities. But there's a major catch. The experiment also transforms him into a living vampire who needs blood to survive. His surrogate brother Milo, played by Matt Smith, also suffers from the same blood disease. When Milo discovers what happened to Morbius, he becomes interested in the same treatment. But things quickly get out of control when the experiment gives Milo dangerous powers as well. There had actually been attempts to bring Michael Morbius to the big screen long before this movie came out. Since 1998, there had been two notable plans involving the character. One idea was to use Morbius as an antagonist in the Blade franchise, while another plan involved Artisan Entertainment developing a standalone Morbius movie. Neither project ended up happening. Years later, Sony announced plans to create a shared movie universe based on characters connected to Spider-Man. The plan officially started moving forward with Venom 2018, and Sony eventually began developing a movie focused on Morbius. By November 2017, writers Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless had completed a screenplay for the project. In June 2018, Jared Leto officially joined the movie as the lead actor, while Daniel Espinosa came on board as director. Production started moving quickly toward the end of 2018 as more actors joined the cast. Filming officially began in London in February 2019. The main filming was completed by June 2019, although additional filming and reshoots were later carried out in Los Angeles in February 2020. Composer John Ekstrand was brought in to create the movie's original musical score, adding the dark and dramatic sound needed for Morbius' transformation and supernatural story. Morbius had its premiere at Plaza Carso in Mexico City on March 10, 2022. The movie was eventually released in theaters in the United States on April 1, 2022. The movie had originally been planned for a much earlier release in July 2020, but it was delayed several times, mainly because of the COVID-19 pandemic. After all those delays, fans finally got the chance to see Jared Leto's version of the Marvel character on the big screen. When the movie came out, it received a lot of negative reactions from critics. Matt Smith's performance received some praise, but the movie was heavily criticized for its screenplay, visual effects, and post-credit scenes. Many reviewers felt that the story didn't live up to the potential of the character. The movie also struggled financially. Morbius made around $167.5 million worldwide against a reported production budget of roughly 75-83 million yen, making it a major box office disappointment. The movie later became a huge topic online because of the internet memes making fun of its reception. The memes became so popular that Sony decided to put Morbius back into theaters about 2 months after its original release on June 3, 2022. Unfortunately, the re-release also failed to make a major impact at the box office. Later, the movie received 5 Golden Raspberry Award nominations, including Worst Picture. It eventually won Worst Actor for Jared Leto and Worst Supporting Actress for Adria Arjona. Despite all the criticism and controversy surrounding it, Morbius remains an interesting part of Sony's Spider-Man universe because it takes a lesser-known Marvel character and turns him into the center of a dark superhero and vampire story. At a hospital in Greece, 10-year-old Michael Morbius meets another sick boy named Lucien who becomes his surrogate brother. Michael gives him the new name Milo, and the two quickly become close. They both suffer from the same rare blood disorder caused by a missing part of their DNA, and both dream of one day living a normal life. Michael's condition is so serious that he can barely walk without crutches, and Milo has the same problem. Their mentor and father figure, Dr. Emil Nicholas, runs a special facility that takes care of people suffering from illnesses that doctors can't cure. Dr. Nicholas sees that Michael is extremely gifted. The kid can understand complicated machines and fix them like it's no big deal. Because of Michael's incredible intelligence, Dr. Nicholas arranges for him to attend a special medical school for gifted children in New York. Michael leaves Greece to continue his education while Milo stays behind under Nicholas's care. Before leaving, Michael promises Milo that he'll never give up and will someday find a cure for their condition. Both boys need 3 blood transfusions every day just to stay alive. Their only hope is finding a way to repair the missing part of their DNA. Michael spends the next several years studying medicine and searching for an answer. 25 years later, Michael has become a world-famous scientist. He develops artificial blood, a medical breakthrough that has saved more lives than penicillin. Because of this achievement, Michael is offered a Nobel Prize. But instead of accepting the award, Morbius turns it down. He believes his artificial blood came from a failed experiment and doesn't think he deserves to be praised for it. Behind the scenes though, Michael is working on something much more dangerous. His colleague and friend Martin Bancroft discovers that Michael has secretly captured dozens of vampire bats from Costa Rica. He believes these bats could hold the key to curing his disease. Morbius studies the bats because they have unique abilities. They drink blood and produce special substances that stop blood from clotting, which helps them digest it. Vampire bats can also attack animals much larger than themselves. Michael believes that if he can combine the bat's DNA with his own, he might be able to give his body similar abilities and finally cure his illness. He first tests the genetic treatment on mice, and the experiment actually works. The mice survive, giving Morbius hope that he has finally found the answer. Michael tells Milo about his plan for one final, highly illegal experiment. Milo agrees to finance the project and helps him set up a private laboratory on a mercenary ship operating in international waters. Michael's experiment works, but not exactly the way he expected. Instead of simply curing his disease, the treatment transforms him into a living vampire. His body becomes incredibly powerful, but he also develops an uncontrollable hunger for blood. When the crew members become afraid of what Michael has turned into, they attack him. Morbius loses control and kills them, draining their blood. Martin is also on the ship and witnesses Michael's horrifying transformation. For a brief moment, Martin's presence helps Michael control himself. But during the chaos, she is knocked unconscious by the security team. Once Michael's bloodlust finally fades and he realizes what he's done, he is completely horrified. He deletes the security camera footage showing his experiment and the bloody attack. He then contacts the authorities and jumps overboard with the two remaining vials of his serum. Michael returns to New York, where he discovers that the transformation has given him incredible abilities. He now has superhuman strength, his incredible speed, powerful reflexes, and echolocation. Even stranger, the vampire bats seem to recognize him as one of their own, but there's a huge problem. Michael needs blood to keep himself under control. He starts drinking his artificial blood instead of human blood. At first, it keeps him stable for around 6 hours, but its effectiveness keeps getting weaker. Every time he drinks it, the amount of time it works becomes shorter. Morbius also discovers something terrifying. If he completely refuses to drink blood, his vital signs begin to crash. He has only two choices: drink blood or die. Meanwhile, FBI agents Simon Stroud and Al Rodriguez begin investigating the people who have been found dead and drained of blood. They eventually connect the murders to Morbius because he has spent his entire life trying to cure his blood disease, and now he suddenly appears extremely healthy and physically powerful. Milo also discovers that Michael has actually cured his original disease, but instead of being happy for his brother, Milo becomes furious when Michael refuses to give him the same treatment. Milo knows that the secret behind Michael's cure is the vampire DNA. He has also seen what Michael has become and understands that the treatment comes with a serious side effect: the need for blood. Still, Milo doesn't care about the risks. He wants the cure no matter what. Later, Michael goes to check on Martin, who is recovering in the hospital. While he's there, he discovers a nurse who has been killed and completely drained of blood. Michael knows how bad this looks, so he tries to escape. But he's eventually cornered and arrested by Agent Stroud. Morbius realizes that his artificial blood is almost useless now and that it will stop working completely within a few days. While he's in prison, Milo visits him and offers to use his money and connections to get him out, but Michael soon figures out the truth. Milo took the serum and became a vampire himself, and he's the one who killed the nurse. Michael escapes prison and confronts Milo. Milo doesn't even feel sorry for what he's done. Instead, he tells Michael to stop fighting his new nature and embrace his vampire powers. Milo believes they should both stop pretending to be normal and enjoy the strength they've been given, but Michael refuses to hurt his brother. He runs away, and during the escape, he discovers another new ability: he can fly. Milo begins watching Martin because he knows Michael will eventually try to contact her. Martin realizes that Milo is keeping an eye on her, so she manages to avoid both Milo and the detectives and secretly meets Michael. By this point, Michael's artificial blood only keeps him stable for about 4 hours and 22 minutes at a time. Michael explains everything Milo has done. He then finds a new laboratory and begins working on a powerful antibody against the vampirism. His plan is to use it to stop Milo and potentially kill him. Michael also knows that he'll eventually lose control of himself, so he plans to use the antibody on himself as well before his bloodlust becomes impossible to control. During all of this, Michael and Martin grow closer and eventually fall in love. Meanwhile, Stroud and Rodriguez find video footage showing one of Milo's attacks. Believing that the vampirism may be spreading, they release the footage to the media. When Dr. Nicholas sees Milo on television, he realizes what has happened and desperately asks him to stop. But Milo is angry with Nicholas because he believes the doctor has always favored Michael over him. In a rage, Milo attacks Nicholas and forces him to call Michael. Michael arrives, but unfortunately he's too late to save his mentor. Milo has also attacked Martin, leaving her badly wounded. Michael rushes back to her, but she dies in his arms. Before she dies, Martin kisses Michael and accidentally takes in a small amount of his blood. With his artificial blood no longer working and his hunger becoming overwhelming, Michael loses control and drinks Martin's blood. But then something unexpected happens. Martin's body begins to change. Michael finally confronts Milo for the last time. Instead of fighting him alone, Morbius calls an army of vampire bats to help him. The bats swarm Milo and hold him down while Michael injects him with the antibody. The treatment works. Milo dies peacefully, ending the nightmare. Michael flies away with the bats, mourning the people he loved while finally accepting what he has become. He is now a vampire and he's also a fugitive being hunted by the authorities. But Michael doesn't know that Martine is still alive. Somewhere else, Martine suddenly wakes up with glowing red eyes. Because she swallowed a small amount of Michael's blood before dying, she has apparently been transformed into a vampire too. Then come the movie's two mid-credit scenes. Adrian Toomes, also known as the Vulture, suddenly finds himself transported into Morbius's universe. Toomes realizes that his strange arrival is somehow connected to Spider-Man. After figuring out that Morbius is also a fugitive, Toomes tracks him down and makes him an offer. He suggests that the two of them team up, and that's where the movie leaves things, opening the door for a possible connection between Morbius, the Vulture, and the wider Spider-Man related universe. Casting Jared Leto's selection as Dr. Michael Morbius represented the foundational casting decision for the 2022 film, a choice that director Daniel Espinosa later described as less a deliberate selection and more a form of predestination. Leto had become loosely attached to the project as early as late 2017, after Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless submitted their script following a secret development process at Sony. He declined to fully commit until he felt satisfied with the creative direction, specifically requesting personal meetings with multiple director candidates under consideration. Among those approached by the studio were Antoine Fuqua and F. Gary Gray. Both ultimately passed. Espinosa, who had previously directed the Sony science fiction thriller Life, met Leto while the actor was touring in Germany with his band 30 Seconds to Mars. The conversation solidified their mutual interest, and by the end of June 2018, both were officially confirmed for the project. Espinosa publicly stated that Leto was the only actor capable of embodying the character, praising the performer's preparation, immersion, and ability to extract unexpected emotional depth from a role that, unusually for Leto, drew closer to his own personality rather than requiring the extreme method transformations for which he had become known. Leto himself was drawn to the moral complexity of a scientist afflicted with a rare blood disease whose desperate attempt at a cure produces transgenic vampirism, granting superhuman abilities without the traditional folkloric weaknesses of vampires. He found the part surprisingly challenging precisely because it demanded less of the transformative character work that had defined earlier performances and more of a measured exploration of internal conflict. Charlie Shotwell was later cast as the younger version of Michael, establishing visual and emotional continuity between the childhood sequences set in a Greek hospital and the adult narrative. The production notes emphasized Leto's dedication from the first day of shooting through the final frames, with Espinosa characterizing him not merely as an actor but as a full creative partner and colleague on set. Matt Smith's casting as Lucian, later nicknamed Milo by Michael, introduced a significant evolution in the character's conceptualization. Early announcements indicated that Smith would portray the comic book figure Loxias Crown, also known as Hunger, a living vampire antagonist. The role was subsequently rewritten into an original creation. A wealthy Surik brother who shares the same rare blood disease and ultimately embraces the vampiric transformation that Michael resists. Smith had previously declined other superhero film offers, but Espinosa's involvement and encouragement from former Doctor Who colleague Karen Gillan, who plays Nebula in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, persuaded him to accept. Espinosa specifically urged Smith to deliver a bold, unapologetically villainous performance once the character's arc was finalized. Joseph Essen was chosen to play the younger Milo, mirroring the childhood dynamic established with Shotwell. Smith later described the collaboration with Leto as entertaining, and enjoyable, while noting a measured interest in method techniques without endorsing the sustained immersion Leto sometimes employed across an entire production schedule. The rewritten character allowed Smith to explore themes of entitlement, frustration with physical limitation, and the seductive freedom of newfound power, elements that diverged sharply from the comic book hunger while still serving the film's central brotherly conflict. Adria Arjona entered negotiations in December 2018 to portray Dr. Martin Bancroft, Michael's scientific colleague and romantic partner. Her casting was confirmed the following month when Sony adjusted the release schedule. Arjona approached the role as the intellectual equal in the laboratory sequences, describing Bancroft as the smart one in the room. She drew personal inspiration from the public presence and communicative style of politician and activist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seeking to infuse the character with grounded intelligence, leadership, and emotional clarity. The actress's prior work in projects such as Pacific Rim, Uprising, Emerald City, and Good Omens had already demonstrated her ability to balance genre demands with nuanced interpersonal dynamics. On set, she expressed concern for Leto's physical commitment to the character's chronic pain, recalling moments when she feared for the actor's spine as he insisted on moving with the restricted gait of someone who had lived with the disease for decades. Espinosa shared similar protective instincts, acknowledging that Leto's immersion required careful monitoring. Arjona's performance therefore functioned both as narrative support for Michael's scientific and emotional journey and as a counterbalance to the physical extremes of the lead portrayal. Jared Harris was cast as Dr. Emil Nicholas, the mentor and father figure who runs the facility caring for patients with incurable illnesses and who becomes a surrogate parent to both young Michael and Milo. Harris brought a measured gravitas drawn from earlier roles that required quiet authority and moral complexity. The character's arc culminates in a confrontation with the transformed Milo, underscoring the emotional stakes of the surrogate family unit established in the film's opening sequences. Harris's presence anchored the childhood flashbacks and the adult laboratory and hospital environments, providing a through line of institutional care that contrasts with the personal desperation driving Michael's experiments. Tyrese Gibson joined the ensemble as FBI agent Simon Stroud, one of the two federal investigators pursuing Michael after the initial body count emerges. In the source comics, the character is depicted as white. The producers adjusted the casting to accommodate Gibson, who signed a 3-picture deal upon joining the production. Gibson described Stroud as possessing a high-tech weapons-grade prosthetic arm that positioned the agent as a kind of grounded superhero within the procedural subplot. All footage featuring the arm was ultimately excised from the theatrical cut, leaving the character's physical presence more conventional while retaining the investigative attention. Al Madrigal was cast opposite Gibson as Agent Rodriguez, Stroud's partner. The pairing supplied the film's primary external pressure on Michael, tracking the vampire attacks and releasing media footage that escalates public alarm. Their procedural scenes intercut with the more intimate scientific and familial conflicts, expanding the narrative scope beyond the central triad of Michael, Milo, and Martin. Michael Keaton's mid-credits appearance as Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, represented a deliberate crossover element linking the film to the broader Spider-Man cinematic landscape. Keaton had previously portrayed the character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe film Spider-Man: Homecoming. The sequence places Toomes in Michael's universe after an unexplained dimensional displacement, leading to a conversation in which the Vulture proposes an alliance. The cameo required careful coordination of continuity and tone, ensuring that Keaton's established characterization remained recognizable while serving the film's post-credits setup. J.K. Simmons filmed material as J. Jonah Jameson, but those scenes were removed prior to release, eliminating another potential connective tissue to the Spider-Man films. Supporting roles were filled with precision to populate the film's various environments. Corey Johnson appeared as the mercenary Mr. Fox, overseeing security during the international waters experiment that precipitates Michael's transformation. Zaris Engelhater played Anna, a patient within the care facility. Joe Ferrara portrayed the bush pilot involved in the Costa Rican bat collection sequence, Additional day players and background performers included Tom Forbes and Clara Rosiger in a pub scene, Joanna Burnett as Nurse Kristen Sutton, Fermin Galliano as a bodega owner, Maya Scully as a diner cashier, Archie Reno as Bobby, Jojo Macari as Gabriel, Abraham Popula as Ryan, and a range of law enforcement and civilian figures who populate the New York investigation and public reaction sequences. Charlie Shotwell and Joseph Essen, already noted as the young leads, were joined by a small ensemble of child performers depicting the hospital environment and the bullying incident that underscores Milo's early volatility. Nina Gold served as casting director, bringing to the project a track record that included high-profile television series and major studio films. Her involvement ensured that the ensemble balance established star power with performers capable of sustaining the film's tonal shifts between medical drama, action, and horror. Gold's selections emphasized actors who could convey intellectual intensity, physical vulnerability, and moral ambiguity without relying solely on gender archetype. The childhood casting of Shotwell and Esson required particular attention to continuity of mannerism and emotional register so that the adult performances would feel like natural extensions of the early trauma. The adult supporting ensemble was assembled to provide credible institutional and street-level texture, preventing the central vampire conflict from existing in isolation. Leto's preparation for the role extended beyond conventional research. He consulted medical professionals and patients living with rare, incurable blood disorders in order to understand the daily realities of chronic pain, dependence on transfusions, and the psychological weight of a life defined by physical limitation. Rather than employing the simple device of placing a pebble in a shoe to simulate a limp, he studied the gait and posture of individuals who actually used canes and crutches. On set, he initially insisted on moving with crutches even between takes. When the process proved too time-consuming, he continued the immersion by being wheeled to the restroom in a wheelchair. Espinosa defended the approach as consistent with Leto's belief that residual physical memory of lifelong pain needed to inform even the cured version of the character. Co-stars registered concern for the actor's physical well-being, yet the commitment contributed to a performance that visually and emotionally tracked the transition from frail scientist to predatory vampire. Visual effects supervisors later noted that Leto's existing long dark hair simplified certain aspects of the transformation design, while careful attention was paid to integrating his beard and preserving recognizable facial structure beneath the pale, sunken, animalistic features required for the full vampire state. Facial ADR sessions in post-production allowed the director to recapture subtle performance nuances under controlled lighting and camera conditions, ensuring that the digital enhancements never completely obscured the actor's choices. Smith's preparation focused on the psychological shift from long-term patient to empowered predator. The rewritten character of Milo required him to embody both the frustration of a lifetime of physical dependence and the exhilaration of sudden liberation. Espinosa's guidance toward a bold villainous register encouraged Smith to lean into the character's entitlement and lack of moral restraint once the serum takes effect. The visual transformation for Milo followed a parallel but distinct path from Michael's, emphasizing a more sinister exaggeration of Smith's facial structure, particularly the forehead and jawline, while still retaining clear identification with the actor. Joseph Esson's portrayal of young Milo established the early volatility that would later erupt into violence, providing Smith with a behavioral baseline from which to expand. Arjona's research centered on scientific competence and emotional authenticity. By modeling aspects of Bancroft's demeanor on a public figure known for clarity and conviction, she sought to avoid any reduction of the character to romantic interest alone. The laboratory sequences demanded that she appear as Michael's intellectual peer, capable of challenging his methods and ultimately performing critical procedural steps during the transformation sequence. Her concern for Leto's physical process underscored the collaborative atmosphere on set, even as the production navigated the practical challenges of an actor fully immersed in chronic pain simulation. Harris approached Nicholas as a figure of quiet institutional authority whose personal investment in the two boys creates the emotional stakes for the later confrontation. The role required a balance of clinical detachment and paternal affection, qualities Harris had previously demonstrated in projects that demanded moral complexity under pressure. Gibson and Madrigal developed the investigative partnership through a combination of procedural realism and heightened genre tension. Gibson's three-picture commitment indicated the studio's interest in expanding the characters beyond a single film, even though the prosthetic arm concept was ultimately abandoned in the editing process. The decision to recast Stroud as a black agent reflected a broader production willingness to update comic book demographics for contemporary casting without altering the character's core function. The inclusion of Keaton's tombs required negotiation of rights and continuity across studio boundaries. The mid-credits placement allowed the appearance to function as both fan service and narrative bridge, positioning Michael within larger network of anti-heroes and villains. The excision of Simmons's Jameson material demonstrated the fluidity of post-production decisions when connective elements risked diluting the film's primary focus. Supporting players such as Johnson's Mr. Fox provided the necessary grit for the illegal experiment sequence, while the array of nurses, officers, vendors, and civilians populated the urban environment that reacts to the emerging vampire threat. Throughout the casting process, the production balanced the need for recognizable star power capable of anchoring a mid-budget superhero film against the requirement for performers who could sustain intimate character work. Leto's early attachment and subsequent full commitment set the tonal and physical standard. Smith's acceptance after initial hesitation brought a complementary intensity to the brotherly conflict. Arjona's negotiation and confirmation supplied the scientific and emotional counterweight. Harris, Gibson, and Madrigal filled the institutional and procedural spaces. Keaton's cameo extended the film's reach into adjacent cinematic universes. The younger performers and day players completed the tapestry, ensuring that every environment, from the Greek hospital to the New York streets, felt inhabited by individuals whose presence supported rather than distracted from the central transformation narrative. Nina Gold's oversight coordinated these selections into a coherent ensemble capable of moving between medical drama, action set pieces, and horror-tinged confrontation. The result was a cast whose individual preparations and collective dynamics reflected the film's thematic preoccupation with disease, cure, power, and the moral cost of survival. Production development and pre-production, the road to a Morbius film, stretched back more than 2 decades before Jared Leto ever put on a cape. In May 2000, Artisan Entertainment struck a deal with Marvel Entertainment to co-produce, finance, and distribute a slate of films built around Marvel characters, and Morbius the Living Vampire was among the properties named in that arrangement. Nothing came of it at the time. Interest in the character resurfaced a couple of years later in a different form. Director Stephen Norrington, who helmed the original Blade film in 1998, shot a small cameo introducing Morbius, intending to expand the role in a sequel. That cameo never made the theatrical cut, and when Norrington declined to return for Blade 2 in 2002, the character quietly disappeared from the franchise altogether. For years afterward, Morbius remained one of those Marvel characters who existed mostly as a rumor of a movie that might someday get made. The character's fortunes changed once Sony began building out a shared cinematic universe around Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery and supporting cast separate from the Marvel Cinematic Universe that Disney and Marvel Studios were assembling. Sony announced this new venture in May 2017, with Tom Hardy's Venom slated to launch it in October 2018. The studio's ambitions extended well past Venom, and other corners of the Spider-Man mythos were floated as possible follow-ups. That same July, John Watts, who had just directed Spider-Man Homecoming, said publicly that he liked the idea of bringing Morbius and Blade into a follow-up to that film, arguing that the brooding tone of characters like Morbius could sit comfortably within the wider Marvel Cinematic Universe. His comments came before Sony had settled on its own separate path for the character, and ultimately Morbius went in the direction of Sony's standalone shared universe rather than Watts' MCU adjacent vision. By November 2017, screenwriters Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless, best known at that point for their work on the 2017 Power Rangers film, had delivered a script to Sony for a Morbius movie the product of what one report described as a secret development process inside the studio. Around the same period, Jared Leto became loosely attached to the lead role, though he was not yet fully committed. Leto made clear that he wanted to personally meet with candidates being considered to direct before signing on, a sign of how much creative input he intended to have in shaping the project from the start. Sony spent much of the following year searching for the right director. By late April 2018, the studio had approached Antoine Fuqua, who expressed some interest in the project and remarked that if he were to make a superhero film, he would want it to reflect the kinds of stories that genuinely excited him creatively. Fuqua ultimately passed on directing Morbius. Sony also considered F. Gary Gray, who weighed the opportunity but likewise chose not to take the job. The studio eventually turned to Daniel Espinosa, who had previously directed the 2017 science fiction thriller Life for Sony and was already a known quantity to the studio's executives. Leto's own path to signing on ran through an unusual venue. While touring Germany in May 2018 with his band 30 Seconds to Mars, he met with Espinosa to discuss the film in person. The two men were officially confirmed as star and director by the end of June 2018, with Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach, and Lucas Foster attached as producers. At that point, Sony was hoping to begin shooting by the end of the year and to slot the finished film into its already forming Marvel release calendar in short order through the back half of 2018. Sony worked out the practical details of where and when to shoot. By September, the studio was leaning toward production in Atlanta, Georgia, the same city that had hosted filming for both Spider-Man. Homecoming and Venom, though a firm release date still had not been set. Speaking around that time, producer Avi Arad expressed enthusiasm for the project, framing its core premise, a healer who becomes a killer, as inherently compelling dramatic material. He was reportedly waiting to gauge Venom's commercial reception before pushing forward more aggressively. Producer Matt Tolmach described Morbius as very far along in development that September, with filming now expected to begin in early 2019, and confirmed that the studio intended for it to be the second entry in its Spider-Man universe after Venom. Tolmach also compared the intensity Leto was bringing to the role to the actor's much-discussed performance as the Joker in 2016's Suicide Squad. Venom's box office success that fall reassured Sony that its shared universe strategy had legs, and by late November 2018, analysts believed the studio would press ahead with further films in the vein of Morbius. Around the same time, Sony dated an untitled Marvel project, widely understood to be Morbius, for a July 10, 2020 release. Casting news followed quickly. Adria Arjona entered negotiations that December to play the film's female lead, Dr. Martine Bancroft, and her involvement was confirmed the following month when Sony shifted the release date slightly to July 31, 2020. Matt Smith also joined the cast around this time in a role that was initially kept under wraps. Screenwriters Art Markham and Matt Holloway, previously known for their work on the first Iron Man film, later made uncredited contributions to the Morbius script as well. And writer Justin Haith was also believed to have worked on the screenplay at some stage. Principal photography began during the final week of February 2019 in London, under the working title Plasma, a codename Sony had floated publicly the previous November. Cinematographer Oliver Wood, whose credits included The Equalizer 2 and the 2015 Fantastic Four, signed on to shoot the film. Morbius would turn out to be the last production he worked on before his death in February 2023. As shooting got underway, Jared Harris and Tyrese Gibson joined the cast, playing Michael's mentor figure and an FBI agent pursuing him, respectively. At this stage, reports indicated Matt Smith was playing the villainous Marvel Comics character Loxias Crown, also known as Hunger. That plan later changed, and Smith ended up playing an original character named Milo, who bears some resemblance to Loxias Crown rather than being a direct adaptation of him. Jared Harris's role was also clarified during filming as Dr. Nicholas, described as a mentor and father figure to both Michael and Milo. In March 2019, the production moved to Manchester, where the city's northern quarter was redressed to stand in for New York City. The following month, Tyrese Gibson revealed he was playing FBI agent Simon Stroud and that Al Madrigal had been cast as his partner Alberto Rodriguez. Filming was scheduled to run roughly 12 weeks in total, and additional work took place at Pinewood Studios. By June 2019, Venom producer Amy Pascal confirmed that production had just wrapped. The film's connection to the wider Spider-Man cinematic landscape deepened later that year. In September 2019, Sony and Disney reached a new agreement extending an earlier deal under which Marvel Studios and its president Kevin Feige would produce a sequel to Spider-Man: Far From Home, keeping the MCU's Spider-Man in Marvel's own shared universe. As part of that broader arrangement, Feige indicated that the MCU Spider-Man would be able to cross cinematic universes going forward, appearing in Sony's separate Spider-Man universe as well as the MCU proper. Commentators at the time described the emerging relationship between the two franchises as a kind of ongoing dialogue, with each acknowledging elements of the other without being formally merged. Morbius's first trailer arrived in January 2020, and it included a brief attention-grabbing appearance by Michael Keaton, reprising his role as Adrian Toomes, also known as Vulture, from the Marvel Studios film Spider-Man: Homecoming, a character who had up to that point existed only within the MCU rather than Sony's separate universe. Some of Keaton's scenes required reshooting later on, once the events of Spider-Man: No Way Home in 2021 had established plot details that needed to align with Morbius's own story. Keaton later admitted that even he had only a hazy understanding of the reasoning behind his character's inclusion in the film. Separately, certain visual touches, including a shot of Michael walking past graffiti depicting Spider-Man, were added to marketing materials without Espinosa's knowledge and were ultimately cut from the finished film. Reshoots for Morbius began in Los Angeles in early February 2020 and wrapped about a month later, just as film productions across the United States were grinding to a halt because of the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic's disruption to the theatrical marketplace forced Sony to push the release date repeatedly. At the end of March 2020, the film was moved from its planned summer 2020 date to March 19, 2021. In January 2021, it was delayed again, first to October 8, 2021, and then to January 2022, after the James Bond film No Time to Die claimed the October slot instead. Later that January, Leto revealed that further reshoots were underway in mid-February 2021, suggesting the production was still being refined even as its release date kept slipping. At the end of April 2021, the date moved back another week to January 28, 2022. Then, at the start of January 2022, Sony pushed the film once more, this time to April 1, 2022, hoping to let Spider-Man: No Way Home's remarkable box office run continue unimpeded into the new year before Morbius arrived in theaters. Visual effects work on the film's central transformation sequences drew on technology the studio had previously used for one of the MCU's biggest antagonists. In March 2022, visual effects supervisor Matthew E. Butler revealed that motion capture technology originally developed for rendering Thanos in the Avengers films had been adapted to bring Leto's vampiric alter ego to life on screen. Around the same time, director Daniel Espinosa spoke about some of his creative touchstones for depicting Michael's powers, citing the Pokemon franchise as an influence, specifically its stylized use of light and color to visualize its creatures' abilities and attacks. Filming logistics for Morbius spanned multiple cities and studio facilities over an extended and at times interrupted schedule. Principal photography launched in London during the last week of February 2019, running under the deliberately vague working title Plasma so as not to tip off onlookers to the project's true identity. From London, the production moved north to Manchester in March 2019, where crews transformed the northern quarter into a stand-in for the streets of New York City, the setting for much of Michael Morbius' story. Studio work also took place at Pinewood Studios, a facility with a long history of hosting major franchise productions. The shoot was budgeted to run around 12 weeks and wrapped, according to producer Amy Pascal, by June 2019. Filming did not end there, however. Reshoots, a standard part of modern blockbuster production, often used to sharpen storytelling, add connective tissue between scenes, or update material in light of later franchise developments, took place in Los Angeles beginning in early February 2020. That round of additional photography concluded about a month later, arriving just before the COVID-19 pandemic brought film production across the country to a standstill in March 2020. A further smaller round of reshoots reportedly occurred in mid-February 2021. According to comments Leto made at the time, as the film's release date continued to be pushed back, and the filmmakers apparently used the extra time to keep refining the picture. Additionally, some previously shot material featuring Michael Keaton's Vulture character needed to be reshot once Spider-Man No Way Home established certain multiversal plot points that had to line up with Morbius' own story. Cinematographer Oliver Wood, a veteran of action and thriller productions including The Equalizer 2 and 2015's Fantastic Four, shot the film. His work on Morbius would prove to be his final feature film credit before his death in February 2023. Editing duties fell to Pietro Scalia. On the visual effects side, the production leaned on tools originally built for rendering the villain Thanos in the Avengers films to create the motion-captured vampiric version of Michael that appears at several points in the story. A choice that visual effects supervisor Matthew E. Butler discussed publicly shortly before the film's release. Not every element filmed made it to the final cut. A planned appearance by J.K. Simmons, reprising his role as newspaper editor J. Jonah Jameson from the earlier Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, was shot but ultimately removed from the finished film. Similarly, scenes establishing a high-tech prosthetic weapon arm for Tyrese Gibson's FBI agent character, which Gibson had discussed excitedly in interviews before release, were also cut entirely. Post-production Morbius's post-production period stretched across roughly 3 years, a span dramatically extended by the COVID-19 pandemic's disruption of the global theatrical calendar. Editing, led by Pietro Scalia, had to accommodate not just the ordinary refinements of a modern effects-heavy blockbuster, but also multiple rounds of reshoots stretched out over more than a year, plus last-minute adjustments needed to keep the film's post-credit material consistent with unfolding developments in Sony and Marvel's wider Spider-Man properties. The Michael Keaton cameo as Adrian Toomes required alteration after Spider-Man No Way Home changed the multiversal ground rules that Morbius' own ending needed to respect, meaning some material had to be reshot and recut well after the bulk of the film had wrapped. Certain marketing and pre-release materials, including a widely noticed shot of graffiti depicting Spider-Man that appeared in early trailers, were also excised from the finished cut. A change director Daniel Espinosa addressed publicly around the time of the film's theatrical debut, noting that the shot had been added without his direct involvement. Visual effects work formed an especially prominent part of post-production, given the film's reliance on computer-generated transformation sequences to depict Michael and Milo's vampiric abilities. As revealed in March 2022, shortly before release, the effects team repurposed motion capture technology that had previously been used to build the character of Thanos for the Avengers films, applying it to Jared Leto's performance as the monstrous version of Michael Morbius. Director Daniel Espinosa also discussed his stylistic ambitions for these sequences around the same time, citing the anime-adjacent visual language of the Pokemon franchise, its use of vivid light and color effects to convey creatures' powers, as a specific point of reference for how Michael's own abilities were rendered on screen. Some of the more heavily scrutinized elements of the finished film, including the pair of mid-credit scenes featuring Michael Keaton's Vulture, were themselves products of this long and complicated post-production process, shaped by the film's years-long delay and the shifting continuity of the broader franchise landscape around it. During that period, music composer John Ekstrand was attached to score Morbius by October 2019, continuing a working relationship with director Daniel Espinosa that stretched back to the director's earlier films. Ekstrand's finished score was released digitally by Madison Gate Records on April 8, 2022, roughly a week before the film's American theatrical debut, giving audiences and soundtrack listeners a chance to hear the music ahead of the movie's wide release. Release theatrical Morbius held its world premiere at the Plaza Carso venue in Mexico City on March 10, 2022, several weeks ahead of its wider theatrical rollout. The film then opened in the United States on April 1, 2022, playing in IMAX and other premium large format presentations designed to showcase its effects-driven sequences. That release date represented the endpoint of a long and winding scheduling saga. The film had originally been dated for July 10, 2020, before shifting 3 weeks later to July 31, 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic then forced a series of further delays. First to March 19, 2021, then to October 8, 2021, and then to January 21, 2022, before edging a week later to January 28, 2022. A final adjustment at the start of January 2022 moved the release to its eventual April 1 date, a decision Sony made in part because it hoped to extend the strong box office momentum generated by Spider-Man: No Way Home into the following months. Separately, Sony opted not to release the film in Russia at all, a decision tied to the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine and the broader wave of studios pulling their films from Russian theaters at that time. The film's theatrical life took an unusual turn roughly 2 months after its initial run had ended. A wave of ironic internet memes, discussed further below, cast Morbius as an object of exaggerated, insincere online praise, and the resulting spike in public attention led Sony to bring the film back to roughly 1,000 theaters on June 3, 2022. This re-release performed just as poorly as the original run, if not worse, taking in only about $280. Sure, over its opening weekend, a sign that the surge of online chatter had not translated into any real audience turnout. Home media Sony's plans for Morbius's post-theatrical life were shaped by broader distribution agreements the studio had struck the previous year. In April 2021, Sony signed deals with both Netflix and Disney covering US streaming and television rights to its film slate for 2022 through 2026, arrangements that would apply once each film had completed its theatrical and traditional home media windows. Under this structure, Netflix secured the exclusive first pay television window, typically running around 18 months, a deal that covered future Marvel-related titles from Sony's Spider-Man universe, Morbius included. Disney, for its part, acquired the subsequent second pay window, granting it the right to stream these films on Disney Plus and Hulu and to air them across its various linear television networks. Morbius became available for digital download on May 17, 2022. It followed on physical media on June 14, 2022, when Sony Pictures Home Entertainment issued it on Blu-ray, DVD, and 4K Ultra HD. The film then moved to Netflix, beginning its streaming run there on September 7, 2022. Commercially, the home media rollout performed unusually well relative to the film's poor theatrical showing. In the United States, Morbius topped the sales and rental chart on Vudu for the week ending May 21, 2022, while also placing second on iTunes and third on Google Play. When physical media arrived the following month, the film debuted at number 1 on Circana's NPD Video Scan First Alert chart, topping both the combined DVD and Blu-ray sales chart and the standalone Blu-ray sales chart for the week ending June 18, 2022. Blu-ray format accounted for the large majority of those sales, 67% of the total, split between 41% for standard Blu-ray and 26% for the 4K Ultra HD edition. Circana's tracking service later confirmed that Morbius was the best-selling DVD and Blu-ray title in the United States for the entire month of June 2022. Looking at the full year, the film ranked 18th among the top 50 best-selling titles on disc for 2022, recording a sales index of 23.22, with 58% of its unit sales coming from Blu-ray formats and 17% specifically from 4K Ultra HD. It also placed 16th on both the year's top 20 best-selling standard Blu-ray discs and its top 20 best-selling 4K Ultra HD Blu-rays. The film's streaming performance after its Netflix debut was similarly striking given its critical reception. Morbius drew more than 12 million views in its first 5 days on the service. According to Nielsen Media Research, which tracks streaming viewership on television screens in the United States, the film logged 610 million minutes of watch time during the week of September 5 through 11, 2022, making it the third most streamed film in the country that week. The following week, from September 12 through 18, it accumulated another 378 million minutes of watch time, placing fourth among streamed films for that period. This pattern, a film widely mocked by critics, nonetheless drawing strong curiosity-driven viewership once it became easily accessible on a subscription platform, mirrored the earlier meme-fueled interest that had prompted its brief theatrical re-release months before. Reception box office Morbius ultimately grossed 73.9 million in the United States and Canada and 93.6 million across other international territories for a worldwide total of $167.5 million, against a production budget reported at between $75 million and $83 million. Given the costs of marketing and distribution layered on top of that production budget, the film was widely classified as a box office bomb, a label that later attached itself, somewhat ironically, to the punchline status the movie achieved online. In its home market, expectations heading into opening weekend were relatively modest but not disastrous. Prior to release, industry trackers projected an opening weekend in the neighborhood of $33 million from 4,268 theaters, with some estimates running as high as $40 to $50 million. The film ended up performing roughly in line with or slightly ahead of the higher end of those projections in its first days. It earned $17.3 million on its opening day alone, which included $5.7 million from Thursday preview screenings, and went on to debut with a 3-day total of $39 million, enough to finish first at the domestic box office that weekend. The film's momentum collapsed almost immediately afterward. In its second weekend, Morbius grossed just $10. $2 million domestically, dropping to second place behind Sonic the Hedgehog 2. That represented a 74% decline from its opening weekend, which analysts noted was the second worst such drop ever recorded for a superhero film, trailing only the 1997 film Steel and the single worst drop ever recorded for a major tentpole superhero release. The slide continued from there. The film fell to 6th place in its third weekend, taking in $4.7 million, a 54% drop. It then fell to 9th place in weekend 4, earning $2.3 million, down 51%, and it managed just $1.5 million in its 5th weekend, landing in 10th place. By its 6th weekend, Morbius had dropped out of the domestic box office's top 10 altogether. Internationally, the film's trajectory followed a broadly similar pattern of a reasonably strong opening followed by a rapid fall-off. Morbius earned $44. $9 million from 62 international markets in its opening weekend abroad, including $2.5 million specifically from IMAX screens. That total fell by 62% the following weekend to $15 million and continued declining from there, $6. $7 million in its third international weekend, $3.3 million in its fourth, and just $1.6 million in its fifth. The film's brief and much discussed theatrical re-release in June 2022, prompted by the internet meme phenomenon surrounding it, added little to its overall financial performance and instead became something of a cautionary tale in its own right. Sony's decision to send the film back into roughly 1 zeros in theaters was widely reported at the time as reflecting genuine confusion within the studio about whether the surge of online enthusiasm for the film represented real audience interest or purely ironic mockery. Several outlets speculated that Sony had simply misread the situation. Whatever the reasoning, the results left little room for ambiguity. The re-release earned only $85,000 on its opening day, and various outlets described the film as having bombed for a second time. Over its full re-release weekend, the film brought in a dismal $300,000, translating to a per-theater average of just $289. After which Sony pulled it from theaters entirely. Despite the tiny scale of that run, Morbius still ranked as the 14th highest grossing film domestically for that short re-release window, a reflection more of how few other films were competing for the same limited theater count than of any genuine audience turnout. Critical response Morbius arrived to overwhelmingly negative reviews, a reception that stood in sharp contrast to the film's eventual commercial life on streaming and home media. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of just 15% based on 285 reviews, with an average score of 3. 8 out of 10. The site's critical consensus describes the film as burdened by uninspired visual effects, flat performances, and a story that borders on incoherent. The film ranks as the 18th worst reviewed superhero movie tracked by the site. On Metacritic, Morbius carries a weighted average score of 35 out of 100 based on 55 critics, a score the site characterizes as reflecting generally unfavorable reviews. Coverage of the response was blunt. The Indo-Asian news service described the film as having been thoroughly torn apart by critics, while Variety characterized the overall reception as almost comically negative. Not every account was uniformly damning, however. Jonathan Crump, writing for the Manchester Evening News, noted that early reviews were mixed rather than universally scathing, observing that some critics singled out the cast's performances, including Leto's, for praise. Variety's Elise Schaefer likewise noted that while reviews skewed negative overall, Matt Smith in particular received some credit for his performance, as Milo audience response, measured through more traditional exit polling mechanisms, was somewhat warmer than the critical consensus, though still lukewarm by industry standards. CinemaScore polling gave the film an average grade of C+ on the service's A+ to F scale, while post-track surveys recorded a 62% positive score with an average rating of 2.5 out of 5 stars, and only 47% of respondents saying they would definitely recommend the film to others. That CinemaScore grade stood as the second worst ever recorded for a film based on Marvel material, trailing only the widely panned 2015 Fantastic Four reboot. Individual reviews from major outlets reinforce the broader pattern of harsh criticism aimed at the screenplay and tone, with more scattered praise reserved for specific performances. Writing for Collider, Emma Keeley argued that the film's central weakness was the screenplay she considered both lazy and uninspired, adding that none of the characters were given any real depth and that the film's attempts at humor tended to fall flat. Barry Hertz of the Globe and Mail was similarly unsparing, describing the film as charmless, incoherent, and so aggressively unpolished that it resisted even being enjoyed as a so-called guilty pleasure. Wendy Ide of The Observer awarded the film just 1 star out of 5, calling it an incoherent offcut from the broader Marvel universe with a vampire theme grafted awkwardly onto it. Hannah Strong of Little White Lies also gave the film 1 star, describing the filmmaking itself as tedious and lacking in genuine spirit. Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times was somewhat gentler, awarding the film 2 out of 4 stars, while suggesting that whatever crossover future the character might eventually have with Spider-Man, the film introducing him played more like an average vampire movie from decades past than a true tentpole origin story. Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle stood out as one of the more positive mainstream critics, awarding the film 3 out of 4 stars and describing it as briskly paced, even framing it as a welcome leaner counterpoint to the more bloated running time of that year's The Batman. Chris Bombray of Joblo Kam gave the film a 6 out of 10, calling it a reasonably solid start for the Sony Spider-Man universe and praising both its cinematography and its horror-inflected elements. Several critics reserved their warmest words specifically for Jared Leto's central performance, even while panning the film surrounding it. Leah Greenblatt of Entertainment Weekly gave the film a B grade overall, crediting Leto with striking convincing notes of fear and longing in what she described as a surprisingly restrained turn. Stephanie Zacharek of Time likewise praised Leto's performance, describing it as carrying a quietly vibrating sense of vulnerability. Not every critic who praised Leto's commitment to the role was equally kind about the material itself. Donald Clark of the Irish Times, awarding the film 2 out of 5 stars, remarked that Leto wore comparatively little makeup playing a vampire compared to his heavily made-up turn as a human character in House of Gucci, while suggesting the actor seemed to be taking an inherently silly role with excessive seriousness. David Rooney of The Hollywood Reporter offered a similar assessment, arguing that the film only intermittently matched the intensity Leto brought to it and suggesting that its overly serious tone squandered the more playful, devilish energy of Matt Smith's antagonist performance. Matt Donato of IGN, who scored the film 5 out of 10, singled out Smith's performance as supplying a sense of color and vibrancy the film otherwise lacked, describing his flamboyant energy as standing in stark, if not always effective, contrast to Leto's more subdued and dour interpretation of Michael. Donato went on to unfavorably compare Leto's solemn approach to Tom Hardy's more overtly comedic, campy performance in the Venom films. Perhaps no element of the film drew more sustained ridicule than its mid-credits scenes, which set up a potential future connection between Michael Morbius and Michael Keaton's Vulture from the Spider-Man films. Critics widely viewed these scenes as clumsy attempts at franchise building that ultimately confused audiences rather than exciting them. Kate Erbland of IndieWire wrote that the scenes were baffling on their own terms, and that Keaton's appearance did little to dispel the broader sense that the film as a whole struggled to cohere or to communicate clearly what it was trying to say. Julia Glassman, writing for the Mary Sue, felt the reveal in these scenes landed with little impact, wondering aloud whether Sony fully understood what made these kinds of post-credit teasers work in the first place. Kathy Brennan of Time Out was harsher still, describing the film's attempt to court audience goodwill by teasing a connection to the MCU's version of Spider-Man as a particularly unearned example of fan service within an already lackluster film. Cast and crew reflected candidly on the film's reception in the years that followed its release. In August 2022, Matt Smith addressed the backlash with a degree of resigned humor, acknowledging that the film had effectively been thrown under the bus, but arguing that there was little to do beyond accepting the outcome, noting that filmmaking, whatever its disappointments, was not a matter of life and death. In September 2024, Jared Harris offered a more pointed piece of criticism, revealing that he had taken the role in part to pay off a mortgage and suggesting that films of this type tend to succeed only when made with a genuine sense of humor about themselves, arguing that Morbius might have benefited from a more mischievous comedic sensibility rather than treating its material with undue solemnity. 2 years after the film's release, director Daniel Espinosa expressed outright regret about the project, describing the experience of trying to make a film shaped by committee as extremely difficult and suggesting that a different director might ultimately have been a better fit for the material. The film's poor standing with critics was later formalized through a string of Golden Raspberry Award nominations. At the 43rd Golden Raspberry Awards, Morbius picked up nominations for Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Screenplay, and went on to win 2 awards outright. Worst Actor for Jared Leto and Worst Supporting Actress for Adria Arjona. Beyond formal reviews and awards, Morbius's reception took on a distinctive second life through internet culture, driven by its combination of weak box office and poor critical notices. Given its lackluster theatrical run and largely negative reviews, the film became fodder for a wide range of internet memes. Polygon described the phenomenon as a kind of collective online hate watch, with fans circulating shitposts that ironically praised the film as though it were a masterpiece. Shortly after release, the hashtag Morbius sweep began trending, built around joking, obviously false claims that Morbius had become the most successful film ever made both financially and critically. These fabricated claims included assertions that the film had sold over 1 trillion tickets, that it had become the first movie to earn over $1 billion, that it had somehow received an impossible approval rating above 200% on Rotten Tomatoes alongside an equally impossible audience score above 140%, and a doctored screenshot purporting to show the film listed on Wikipedia's page of highest grossing films with earnings of 352.9 trillioner. Another widely circulated joke falsely claimed that filmmaker Martin Scorsese, who had previously argued publicly that superhero films did not constitute cinema, had reversed his position after watching Morbius. This fabricated quote was shared apparently sincerely on Instagram by cast member Tyrese Gibson, who later deleted the post, which journalists at the time attributed to Gibson genuinely believing the quote was real rather than participating knowingly in the joke. A second wave of memes followed the film's release on digital platforms, many built around the fabricated catchphrase "It's Morbin Time," a play on both the Power Rangers catchphrase "It's Morphin Time" and the Fantastic Four character Ben Grimm's signature line "It's Clobberin' Time." Fans on the film's official Discord server began referring to themselves as Morbheads, and some users engaged in so-called Morbin activity across various Discord servers by distributing pirated copies of the film. A number of channels on the live streaming platform Twitch began illegally broadcasting the entire film on a repeating loop. One such channel, calling itself Morbius 247, was eventually banned after amassing thousands of followers. Piracy tied to the meme phenomenon spread to other platforms as well, and on Tumblr, users compressed the entire film into an extremely small GIF file that circulated widely. Separately, viral and entirely fake news posts claimed that a Morbius sequel had been officially greenlit as a direct result of the meme wave, a false claim that spread widely enough to push Morbius 2 to trend on Twitter, alongside a full week during which the phrase "It's Morbin time" also trended on the platform. Jared Leto engaged directly with the meme culture surrounding his own film, posting a tweet asking, "What time is it?" alongside a 19-second video in which he appeared to be caught reading a script for a fictitious sequel titled Morbius 2. It's Morbin time, credited to a screenwriter identified only as Bartholomew Cubbins. In reality, a pseudonym Leto used himself. After the film's poorly performing theatrical re-release in June 2022, a petition subsequently appeared on Change.org calling for the film to be returned to theaters for a third time, framed with the joking justification that audiences had simply been busy the weekend it played. Speculation about where the character might go next in the broader Sony and Marvel cinematic landscape persisted for some time after the film's release, even as its box office performance made a sequel increasingly unlikely. In January 2021, before the film had even reached theaters, Leto suggested there was potential for his version of Michael Morbius to eventually cross paths with Mahershala Ali's version of Blade, who had been cast in a separate Marvel Cinematic Universe project. That December, discussing the multiverse concept introduced by Spider-Man No Way Home, Leto again floated the idea of further crossovers involving his character in future films. Tom Holland, star of the MCU's own Spider-Man films, expressed interest in eventually seeing his version of the web-slinger face off against Michael on screen, while producers Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal both confirmed some level of interest in a potential film pairing Leto's character with Ali's version of Blade. In March 2022, shortly before Morbius's theatrical release, Leto also spoke about the possibility of a future film bringing his character together with Tom Hardy's Venom. Despite this ongoing speculation, no such crossover or sequel ever materialized. During CinemaCon 2022, Sony unveiled a range of upcoming Marvel-related projects including Venom, The Last Dance and Spider-Man, Beyond the Spider-Verse, but conspicuously made no announcement regarding any follow-up to Morbius, leaving commentators to note that the character's future within the franchise appeared to be in serious doubt. That uncertainty was effectively resolved in December 2024, when reports indicated that Kraven the Hunter would serve as the final film in Sony's Spider-Man universe, closing the door on any further installments and with it, any possibility of a sequel to Morbius ever being made. Reviews number 1 Morbius 2022 Blu-ray review, below average. Summary. Morbius is a harmless distraction, but there isn't anything that makes it stand out with no truly memorable action scenes. The Blu-ray has some decent special features, but I'm not sure that makes this worth owning. Plot. Dangerously ill with a rare blood disorder and determined to save others suffering his same fate, Dr. Morbius attempts a desperate gamble. While at first it seems to be a radical success, a darkness inside him is unleashed. Will good override evil, or will Morbius succumb to his mysterious new urges? Review. There are times when you watch a film and everything about it seems familiar despite the fact you have never seen it before. Morbius is one of those movies, and after having the release date move so many times due to the pandemic, it's no surprise that it ended up being a box office dud. It is at least responsible for some enjoyable memes, and even the boys poked fun at it. I don't hate the film as it's well paced, coming in at an hour and 45 minutes, and even has some impressive visuals, especially when Morbius Jared Leto is in his vampire form, but the story just comes across as bland, where you're never emotionally involved with the characters. The performances are decent enough, with Leto doing his best with the material and Jared Harris showing up for the paycheck. Matt Smith plays Morbius's childhood friend Milo, who unsurprisingly doesn't follow his friend's advice and ends up becoming the villain. Smith looks to be enjoying himself and he gives the film a bit of life, but by the CG-filled finale, I had tuned out and didn't care what was going on. The action scenes are mostly forgettable with nothing really standing out, which is a shame as the character of Morbius was always one of my favorites in the old Spider-Man cartoon. The post-credit scenes are fun, promising a potential Sinister Six tale, but due to this film's box office failure, then I doubt it will happen, although Sony have been trying for years to set it up. The music score may not be all that memorable, but I liked that main theme and it worked well during the action scenes. It matched the rather snazzy neon credits too. Special Fegatus. Dolby Vision Hader's presentation of the film. Dolby Atmos audio track DTS HD Master Audio 5.1 on the Blu-ray outtakes and bloopers. Features defining the anti-hero from human to vampire, visual effects, lights, camera, action, the good, bad and ugly supporting cast doing the stunt work, living vampire from comics to screen, nocturnal Easter eggs, optional English, English SDH, French and Spanish subtitles for the main feature. The special features are worth checking out, especially the nocturnal Easter eggs, which points out a few hidden details in the movie that I otherwise would never have noticed. It looks like the cast had fun too, and the one person who comes across as awesome is Adria Arjona, who would give the crew candy. Overall, Morbius has a few entertaining moments, but nothing that really stands out. We get some solid performances, and Matt Smith at least looks like he's having some fun. If you enjoyed the film, then the Blu-ray special features only add to it, but if you didn't like it, there isn't much here that will change your mind. Number 2, Morbius 2022. Director Daniel Espinosa, runtime 108 min, rating PG-13, release year 2022. Starring Adria Arjona, Al Madrigal, Jared Harris, Jared Leto, Matt Smith. Country, United States. Language, English. Embraces the Gothic mythology that inspired it, a stylish, intriguingly toned story of a man trying to thwart mortality. Richard Lawson for Vanity Fair about the film. Dangerously ill with a rare blood disorder and determined to save others suffering his same fate, Dr. Michael Morbius attempts a desperate gamble. What at first appears to be a radical success soon reveals itself to be a remedy potentially worse than the disease. About the filmmaker. A Swedish director of Chilean origin, Daniel Espinosa graduated from the Danish Film School in Copenhagen and made his directorial debut with the short film Boxeren 2003. Adept at crafting compelling thrillers, he was named one of Variety's 10 directors to watch in 2010 for Easy Money, one of the most popular films in Sweden that year. He directed the feature films Safe House 2012 and Child 44 2015. And the world premiere of his sci-fi thriller Life 2017 was selected as the closing night film at the SXSW Film Festival. Espinosa directed Academy Award winner Jared Leto in Morbius, a film based on the Marvel Comics character, with nods to Bram Stoker's novel and F.W. Murnau's silent film Nosferatu from screenwriters Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. Major support: Ohio Arts Council, Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Columbus Foundation, Campus Partners, National Endowment for the Arts, with help from G&J Pepsi, WowSU, Public Media. Trailer. Number 3, Morbius 2022, movie trailer 2. The cure to Jared Leto's rare blood disease turns him into a monster in Marvel's film. Morbius trailer 2. Columbia Pictures has released the second movie trailer for Morbius 2022. View here the Morbius teaser trailer, cast and crew. Daniel Espinosa's Morbius stars Jared Leto, Adria Arjona, Jared Harris, Matt Smith, Tyrese Gibson, Corey Johnson, Tom Forbes, Al Madrigal, Charlie Shotwell, and Michael Keaton. Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless wrote the screenplay for Morbius. John Ekstrand created the music for the film. Oliver Wood crafted the cinematography for the film. Plot synopsis. Morbius plot synopsis. One of Marvel's most compelling and conflicted characters comes to the big screen as Oscar winner Jared Leto transforms into the enigmatic anti-hero Michael Morbius. Dangerously ill with a rare blood disorder and determined to save others suffering his same fate, Dr. Morbius attempts a desperate gamble. What at first appears to be a radical success soon reveals itself to be a remedy potentially worse than the disease. Morbius 2022 movie trailer 3. Jared Leto seeks to control the monster inside of him, March 4, 2022. Morbius 2020 teaser trailer. Jared Leto's blood disorder cure search leads to vampirism, January 13, 2020. Watch the Morbius trailer too. Leave your thoughts on it and this article below in the comment section. Readers seeking to support this type of content can visit our Patreon page and become one of our Film Books patrons. Readers seeking more movie trailers can visit our movie trailer page, our movie trailer Twitter page, and our movie trailer Facebook page. Morbius will be released on Columbia Pictures on January 28, 2022. Want up to the minute notifications? Filmbook staff members publish articles, email, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Pinterest, Reddit, and Flipboard. Morbius trailer 2 related articles, Rollo Tomasi, Facebook, X, Flickr, YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram, TikTok. Number 5, Keith and the Movies. Review, Morbius, 2022, 13. I still haven't fully figured out how Sony's Spider-Man universe connects with the broader Marvel Cinematic Universe. Some parts seem more connected than others, while other parts don't seem connected at all. Oh well. To be honest, I've lost interest in trying to figure it all out. In a nutshell, both universes are somehow related, and Morbius and the most recent installment. Unfortunately, it's not a particularly good installment. It's not terrible either. Certainly not as bad as Sony's last effort, Venom. Let there be carnage. But it's hardly a movie you'll be rushing out to see again. Morbius always seemed like an unusual and risky choice. And from the very start, it never felt like the studio was all that certain on how to approach the movie and on when to release it. Granted, COVID-19 played a big part in some of its delays. Still, there was hesitancy from Sony that was hard to miss, especially in their promotion of the film. And even the earliest trailer seemed desperate, name-dropping Venom and revealing Michael Keaton's Vulture just to grab the attention of the lucrative superhero genre's fan base. It feels like Morbius has been about to come out for years. One of the great blessings about its release is that I'll no longer have to sit through its trailers, which found their way in front of every single movie I would see at the theater. I could almost recite them word for word. And while my interest in the movie had waned, I still held out hope regardless of the lashing it took during early screenings, much of it from the Marvel Studios faithful. Morbius is directed by Daniel Espinosa, and despite the mixed reactions, I enjoyed his last 3 movies, Safe House, Child 44, and Life. This is a much different venture for Espinosa, and it shows. At times, his movie plays great and sports its own unique style, which really comes out in some of the action scenes. But there are just as many moments that feel disjointed, rushed, or uninspired. The result is a mixed bag. Jared Leto is a nice fit playing Dr. Michael Morbius, who suffers from a rare, debilitating blood disease he has had since birth. Gifted since childhood, Michael gained notoriety in the medical science world for developing a life-saving synthetic blood. Since then, he has used his talents to try and find a cure for his disease. Helping him is his scientist partner and potential love interest Dr. Martin Bancroft Adria Arjona, and funding his work is his wealthy friend and surrogate brother Milo Matt Smith, who happens to share the same illness. Strangely, Michael's serum seemingly comes out of the blue. All we really know is that it involves vampire bats from Costa Rica and the mixing of bat DNA with human DNA. As Michael explains to Milo, it's highly experimental, morally questionable, and very expensive. When a sickly and desperate Michael injects himself with the serum, he does indeed cure his disease. But he also gains superhero strength, sonar-like sensitivity, and a rather disturbing appetite for human blood. In one sense, it's tempting to praise the movie for cutting through the scientific mumbo-jumbo associated with Michael's work. There are a couple of scenes where he's recording medical logs explaining his symptoms. But for the most part, Espinosa and screenwriters Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless mercifully skip past that stuff. On the other hand, it's such a weird and wild approach to medicine, yet we get nothing to form the basis of his experiments. A guy turns himself into a living vampire and we are just supposed to go with it. Of course, every superhero story needs a villain, and here it comes in the form of Milo. Frightened by what he has become, Michael tries to protect Milo by refusing to give him the serum, but Milo gets his hand on a vial and injects himself. While Michael sees his vampire condition as a curse, Milo fully embraces it, which pits the close friends against each other. Like most of the characters, Milo lacks some needed depth. Matt Smith's performance is solid even though the script pulls him in some weird directions. Sadly, the bond between Milo and Michael, which should have added emotional weight to their conflict, barely gets beyond surface level, leaving Smith and Leto with little to explore. Visually, there are some cool stylish touches that I liked quite a bit. They're unlike anything we've seen before in the crowded superhero movie space. But the drab and murky color palette doesn't always help, and there are times where the CGI heavy action can be hard to decipher. Take the final 15 minutes, which can be really hard to make out, right up to the film's jarringly abrupt ending. Meanwhile, Arjona offers a good supporting presence even if she isn't given much to do. And there's Tyrese Gibson in the thankless role of a generic FBI agent trying to track Michael down after bodies drained of blood begin showing up across the Big Apple. Gibson is more of a plot device than an authentic character. Of course, there are also two obligatory post-credit scenes that confused me more than excited me. Sure, they tease interesting things to come, but they also reminded me of how convoluted this Sony Admo CU collaboration has been. Morbius does little to change that. Leto is certainly up for the role, and I can see where he could have done something special with a better script and more focused direction. As it is, Morbius is a middle of the road Marvel movie, one that ultimately teases more than it's able to deliver. Morbius opens in theaters tomorrow. Verdict 2.5 stars. Number 6 Morbius 2022. For tonight's feature, I viewed Sony's new release from their Venomverse universe, Morbius 2022. This marks Sony's first addition to the Venomverse, and as such, the movie finally turns that world from a playground for symbiotes into a true shared universe. Not that this has any crossover material outside of a throwaway line and an awkward post-credit scene, but it is an important milestone for Sony and one you'd think would be important to them. Then again, they made so much money off Spider-Man, maybe they no longer care. Blood, sweat, tears, and more blood. The movie is helmed by director Daniel Espinosa, who obviously has some horror experience from making the Alien-esque Life 2017, and I assume this is why he was picked for the movie. The movie's writers, Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless, have a string of genre movies to their name, but it's worth noting their highest IMDb score is for Dracula Untold, a movie I did enjoy, which hits the heady heights of 6.210. The rest of their movies are in the fives, and that probably explains a lot about this one. Jared Leto stars as the eponymous doctor Michael Morbius and is joined by Matt Smith's Milo Lucian, Adria Arjona as Martin Bancroft, and Jared Harris as Dr. Emil Nicholas. There are also a number of minor roles that appear to have been reduced to bare bones in the edit room, including Tyrese Gibson as a race-swapped Simon Stroud, who in the comics is actually a superhero himself, but apparently his entire arc was cut, reducing the role to just a chasing FBI agent that seems a little more competent than his colleagues. Apparently, there were whole scenes featuring his cyborg arm, but neither those nor the arm itself made the theatrical release. Still, he has more presence than Michael Keaton's Adrian Toomes, who appears to have had his entire role reduced from something worthy of inclusion in the trailer to just a confusing mid-credits cameo. Vampire interrupted. Speaking of Keaton, let's address the elephant in the room. This movie was originally due to be released in July 2020, but with COVID delaying things, both Sony and Disney shuffled their Marvel deck, and this had a knock-on effect to a lot of the movies and the continuity between them. There was also a new deal signed between Sony and Disney in relation to Spider-Man's on-screen presence. Through all this, there ended up being a need for extensive reshoots and a key change to the movie that removed all references to anything MCU until the mid-credits. At this point, I think Morbius ended up a gutted husk of the movie that Espinosa originally intended, though it is hard to tell. What is clear is that Keaton definitely had a bigger role, as the scene from the first trailer is completely absent. Also absent is the Spider-Man murderer graffiti that was present in the trailer. Apparently, this was added by the studio without the director's knowledge. Best of enemies. One can speculate on what was meant to be, but ultimately we can only deal with what is. So let's dig into that. The first thing to note is this film feels very small. There are effectively only 4 characters with any importance to the story, and Jared Harris is used sparsely. Adria Arjona has a bit more of a role, but even that feels like it is missing some key character moments. The movie instead focuses on Smith and Leto. In itself, that's not a bad move, but if you are going to focus so heavily on a pair of friends that become enemies, there should really be more of an emotional connection between them. Instead, while both actors do their best for their role, ultimately every decision either character makes is entirely done to drive the plot. None of it feels particularly natural. There's very little emotional ambivalence, and when they inevitably face off, it doesn't really feel like two lifelong friends that have gone past the point of no return, living vampire or dying franchise. The plot is itself simple and largely predictable. There is no more to it than what you would read in a synopsis. I would say there is nothing more to the movie than you see in the trailer, but actually, there is more in the trailer. This is a bare bones story that has promise, and had they found an angle to focus on or expand it, could actually have been good. But alas, there is no such angle. The movie just plows through a series of events from start to end with almost no character growth, world building, or plot complexities outside of some obvious twists. Ultimately, what is there is absolutely fine. The actors' performances were solid, the action sequences mostly work, there are a few cool visuals, and there are no overbearing politics or modern cliches that made me especially dislike it. The problem is there just isn't much to the film at all. One day, maybe there will be an Espinosa cut or at least some kind of explanation about why the end result appears so different to what was promised in that first trailer. That should make for an interesting story. In the meantime, though, this movie does not